September 14, 1974. A trucker named Willie Jameson was running late on County Road 49 in Mississippi when he saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. 3 bodies in a gravel parking lot, 8 more inside a converted tobacco warehouse. 11 men total, all executed with military precision over 6 hours. The perpetrators? 2 brothers who walked in with enough ammunition to start a war. The motive? An $8,500 gambling debt and a dying father's stolen land. But here's what the FBI never put in their reports. What the newspapers never printed. What changed this from just another rural massacre into something that split an entire county down the middle for 50 years? Because when federal agents surrounded the Carter farmhouse 4 days later expecting a shootout, they found 2 brothers sitting on the porch drinking coffee, waiting. Not running, not hiding, just waiting. Because this wasn't about getting away with murder. This was about sending a message written in blood that some families won't go down quiet. If you have the courage to hear how honor becomes horror, stay with me. But I warn you, this story will make you question everything you think you know about right and wrong. James Lee Carter turned 34 on June 12, 1974. 6'1", lean from years of farm work, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. Souvenir from Khe Sanh in Vietnam, where shrapnel had missed his eye by less than an inch. He'd come home with a Purple Heart, nightmares he never discussed, and a belief that the world made sense if you followed the rules and kept your word. Every morning he woke at 5:15 in the farmhouse his grandfather built in 1923, made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in it, and sat on the back porch watching dawn break over soybean fields that had belonged to his family for 55 years. His younger brother Robert, everyone called him Bobby, was 29 that September. 5'10", stockier, with a quick smile and a 3-year-old son named Sammy, who was the light of his life. Bobby worshipped his older brother, always had. When James said jump, Bobby asked how high. That kind of loyalty ran deep, forged in childhood and hardened by the knowledge that they only had each other. What neither brother knew that summer was that their father, Samuel Carter, 68 years old and dying slowly from emphysema, had gotten into trouble. Medical bills from 3 hospitalizations. Somewhere along the way, Samuel had borrowed money using the land as collateral. $8,500 at 15% interest from a man named Lester Lucky Haynes. Lucky Haynes was 41 years old, 5'9", soft around the middle with slicked back hair dyed jet black and a smile like a used car salesman right before he sold you a lemon. He wore polyester suits in shades of brown and tan, gold rings on every finger, smelled like cheap cologne applied with a heavy hand. Lucky ran the Saturday night poker game at Turner's Warehouse on County Road 49. Not just ran it, controlled it. Had connections to the Dixie Mafia, took his percentage off the top, and made sure the local law looked the other way. For 18 months, Lucky and Samuel had been doing business. Samuel needed money for medical bills. Lucky said he could help. Easy terms, no questions asked. Samuel signed papers he couldn't quite read, legal documents full of lawyer language he didn't understand. And somewhere in that transaction, Lucky Haynes had done what Lucky Haynes always did. He'd found an angle, worked a scheme, made sure he came out ahead. The explosion came on Friday, September 6, 1974, just after 2 in the afternoon. James was under the hood of his truck when he heard his father scream. Not a yell, a scream. The kind of sound a man makes when something inside him breaks. He ran into the house and found Samuel standing in the kitchen, clutching a letter, his face the color of old newspaper, chest heaving like a broken engine trying to start. "They're taking it," Samuel wheezed. "They're taking the land." The letter was from a law office in Jackson, legal language that James had to read 3 times to understand, but the meaning was clear. Samuel Carter's land, all 180 acres, had been signed over to Lester C. Haynes as payment for a debt. The transfer was legal, the deed was recorded, the land was gone. "I didn't," Samuel gasped, sinking into a chair. He said it was just collateral, said I'd never lose it. James called Bobby, then called for an ambulance. By the time it arrived, Samuel had suffered a heart attack. At the hospital, after the doctors stabilized him, Samuel told his sons the whole story. How Lucky had approached him 18 months ago. How the loan had seemed simple. How Lucky had explained that the land deed was just a formality, that banks required collateral, but no way would it ever come to that. How Samuel had trusted him because Lucky was a regular at the Saturday game, because men who played poker together looked out for each other, because in Yazoo County your word was supposed to mean something. But Lucky Haynes's word meant nothing. He'd structured the loan so that when Samuel couldn't make the impossible payments, the land transferred automatically, legal, clean, and because Samuel couldn't read legal documents, because he'd signed papers he didn't understand, because he'd trusted a man in a polyester suit who smelled like cheap cologne, the Carter family land was gone. James and Bobby sat in the hospital parking lot until after midnight, not talking, just sitting in James's truck with the windows down, listening to crickets and the occasional car passing on Highway 49. Finally, Bobby spoke. "We have to do something." James lit a cigarette. The flame from his Zippo briefly illuminated his face. The scar through his eyebrow looked like a crack in stone. "Yeah," he said quietly, "we do." On Monday morning, James tried to do things the right way. He drove to the Yazoo County Sheriff's Office and asked to speak with Sheriff Tom Beckworth. He explained the situation, the loan, the deed transfer, Lucky Haynes's fraud. "Son," Beckworth said, leaning back in his chair, "I understand your frustration, but if the papers are legal, if your daddy signed them—" "He was tricked," James said, keeping his voice level. "Lucky Haynes lied to him. Can you prove that? You got a recording? A witness?" James didn't answer. They both knew the answer. "This is a civil matter," Beckworth said. "You need a lawyer, not a sheriff. With what money? That's why my daddy borrowed in the first place." The sheriff's face softened slightly. "I'm sorry about your situation, but Lucky Haynes pays his taxes, follows the law mostly, and has friends who'd make my life difficult if I started poking around without evidence. Best advice I can give you is forget about the land and move on." James walked out at 11:23, stood in the parking lot under a sun that felt like it was trying to burn holes through his shirt. The law wouldn't help. He'd known it before he walked in, but some part of him had needed to try. On Tuesday, James drove to Vicksburg, 50 miles south, found what he was looking for in a pawn shop on Washington Street. A Colt 1911, .45 caliber, Korean War surplus, $200. He filled out the paperwork with steady hands, all of it legal, all of it traceable. On Wednesday, he visited his father at the hospital. Samuel was still weak, tubes running from his arms, oxygen mask making his words come out muffled. "Don't do nothing stupid, son," Samuel whispered. "The land ain't worth dying over." "I'm not going to die, Daddy. That ain't what I'm worried about." That night, James sat at his kitchen table with maps of Yazoo County spread out, marking locations with a pencil. Turner's Warehouse, the route to Highway 49, distance from the nearest sheriff's substation, 18 miles. Response time, 20 minutes minimum. Bobby arrived at 8, saw the maps, the gun wrapped in brown paper, the boxes of ammunition. "This Saturday?" Bobby asked. "This Saturday. You sure about this?" James looked at his younger brother. Bobby was 29, had a wife who loved him, a son who needed him. He could still walk away. "You don't have to be part of this," James said. "I can do it alone." Bobby pulled out a chair, sat down. "You remember when I was 7 and those Harmon boys jumped me, beat me so bad I couldn't see out of my left eye for a week?" James remembered. He'd been 12, had found Bobby crying in the ditch by the road. "You put both of them in the hospital," Bobby continued. "Dad had to pay their medical bills. But you did it anyway because that's what brothers do. They don't let people hurt their family and walk away." Bobby stood up, walked to the window. "Sammy asked me yesterday if Grandpa Samuel was going to die. I told him no, that Grandpa was strong. But he ain't fine. He's dying because Lucky Haynes robbed him. And in a few years when Sammy's older and asks me what I did about it, I ain't going to tell him I stood by and did nothing." "All right then," James said. "We do this together." Saturday morning, September 14th, dawned clear and hot. James woke at 5:15 like always, made his coffee, sat on the porch, smoked his 2 cigarettes. Everything the same as every other morning, except for the knowledge that by this time tomorrow, he'd either be in jail or dead. At 8:47 that evening, James and Robert Carter climbed into James's pickup truck and drove toward County Road 49. In the truck bed, wrapped in canvas, a .45 pistol, a 12-gauge shotgun, a .30-06 hunting rifle, and enough ammunition to end 11 lives. 9:47 p.m. Turner's warehouse sat 200 yards off the main road. Light leaked through cracks in the walls. Inside, men's voices carried laughter, the shuffle of cards, the clink of bottles. James sat in his truck, engine ticking as it cooled. His heartbeat was steady and slow, the way it had been in Vietnam. That same cold clarity settling over him like a familiar coat. "You ready?" James asked quietly. Bobby swallowed hard, nodded. "Yeah, I'm ready." James picked up the .45, checked the chamber for the 10th time. "Bobby, after tonight nothing's the same. You understand that?" "I understand. Then let's finish this." They climbed out of the truck. The sound of crickets filled the night. James's boots crunched on gravel as he approached the warehouse. Through a gap in the siding, he could see 8 men around a poker table. Lucky Haynes sat with his back to the door, wearing a tan suit jacket, gold rings catching the light. Deputy Marcus Webb sat to Lucky's right, his service revolver on the table beside his beer bottle. James reached the door. His hand touched the knob. Last moment, last chance to turn back. He thought about his father in that hospital bed, about 3 generations of Carter land stolen with a smile and legal paperwork. No. James opened the door. What happened in the next 6 hours would leave 11 men dead, 2 brothers facing life in prison, and an entire county asking the question that still has no answer. Where is the line between justice and murder? Between protecting your family and becoming a monster? Between victim and executioner? The Carter brothers answered that question with blood. 11 lives ended, 11 families destroyed, and a message written in gunpowder and rage that some men won't go down quiet when the system fails them. 4 days later, when FBI agents surrounded the farmhouse, they found James and Bobby sitting on the porch, unarmed, waiting. Not running, just waiting to face what came next. Because this was never about getting away with it. This was about making sure Lucky Haynes never destroyed another family. About proving that honor still mattered, even when the world said it didn't. James Carter died in prison in 2003 at 63. His last words, asking whether his father ever knew what they'd done in his name. Bobby Carter remains incarcerated at 79, still asking himself if it was worth it. 50 years later, the question remains, what would you do if the system failed you completely? Where do you draw the line between justice and revenge? And how far would you go to protect what's yours when the law says you should just accept being robbed? If this story made you think, leave your like and subscribe. Comment below, where is your line? Because these stories aren't just history. They're happening right now, somewhere in forgotten places where desperate men decide that blood is the only language left when everything else has failed.